We got 20 minutes to a half hour left, and the last few questions I wanted to ask were, I'll maybe ask both of them and then you can figure out how you want to answer them. But the first thing is just talking about your experience as Indigenous artists and navigating that. What are the challenges? What are things you want people to know about, you know, that demographic? And then what's next? What do you have coming up? What sort of art shows or opportunities should people be aware of so they can keep following the work that you do? Because I'm sure everybody wants to, so.
My experience as an Indigenous artist by Jonathan Parker. Let's see. So when I was at the Institute of American Indian Arts, their lessons consisted of my painting instructor, Norman Akers, who's, I believe, an Osage fella. He's now teaching at University of Kansas. He would say, Jonathan, go read about the Ojibwe people and paint something, you know, like from that, you know, you can really make like a solid image of. And that's what he wanted me to do, is like, you know, paint like the eagle flying with, carrying an eagle feather, wearing a headdress. And I was like, I don't want to do that. So I started painting like from, you know, surrealism, I really love comics like Tales from the Crypt, stuff like that. So I would incorporate that into my work. But I think, you know, being an Indian guy, being an Indigenous person, I have an Indigenous hand, you know, I have an Indigenous spirit. So it would sort of naturally kind of mix, and it would wind up being something where I would bring it to critique, and you would have all these really fine, you know, romantic images of chiefs and stuff like that. And then there would be my work. And I remember Norman Akers he would critique this one and that one, and he'd get to my work and he'd go, every time. I remember I would watch his mouth, because he always had these two little white pieces of spittle, like on the side of his mouth, and I would wait for it. He'd go, Jonathan, well, I think you've really done it this time. So those were my student years. That was me trying to get professional training as an artist, and probably not playing the game the way that it should have been played. But I think I've been doing that since. You know, like I've always tried to come up with something that I don't think is the obvious answer to stuff. I respect the artists from my community that paint that way. I love their work. I really do. You know, I have some of that stuff in my house. Like if you walk into my house, first thing you see is a guy wearing a big old plain style headdress and a pair of teal sunglasses. You know, and I painted that because I was at a show in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and there was this exhibit full of those. Like this artist had painted nothing but guys wearing headdresses and sunglasses, and one of them was like eating an ice cream cone, or you know, one of them had like a Viewmaster. You guys know what those are? And I wanted one of those, but I didn't want to spend the $4,000 that he had on the price tag. So I took a cell phone picture of it, and I went home and I created it stroke for stroke in about 3 hours, and I hung it on my wall without signing it. And that's my one piece of artwork that looks like that. But the rest of them, you know, they're obviously of Indigenous, probably symbology, but it's not obvious to everybody. So early on, I would submit work to shows that was like a call to artists for Indigenous folks. And the people would be like, how is this Indian artwork? Like, where does this fall, you know, into the category of Native American artwork? And I'd be like, well, I think a Native American painted it. So that's probably where it qualifies. And I was really conflicted, you know, because I saw people like playing the game and they would get gallery representation and they would sell out. And I tried it a couple times. I was like, all right, I'll play. And I remember painting this portrait of Chief Hole in the Day, and it was gone like moments after it was dry, you know, like it was sold for thousands of dollars right off the easel. And I was just like, dang, anytime I get hungry, I suppose I could do one of those. But I'm a glutton for punishment, so it was rare. I would do that occasionally if the mood struck. And I really had to kind of like stay consistent and keep submitting to shows, and eventually people were like, oh yeah, you know, that's okay, I know who that guy is. And it worked out because you know, I got a solo exhibit at the Two Rivers Gallery, and it was something like 2003, and it was a nice, you know, show. There were a lot of people standing around asking lots of questions about the artwork, and it got me, you know, another exhibit where, so that exhibit, this is kind of a funny story. This is one of my, this seems like it's relevant. This is my first solo exhibit. I'm still in college, and I show up to this exhibit, and I'm sweating bullets. I actually left. When I got to the front door, I looked in to see all the people, because it was night out, and you could see in the gallery, but they couldn't see out. And I started sweating so hard that I took off. But I came back like 15 minutes later or something, and there were a lot of people standing around. They didn't know how to really like receive the work because it was in a gallery where, you know, traditionally there was a lot of stuff that was identifiably like Native American artwork, and it sparked interest, but none of the paintings sold. You know, I had some of the stuff marked at like $500, $300. Some of you might have heard this story. $400, and I remember talking to this guy, and I looked across the gallery, and there was this painting of these two gentlemen arguing. It was a diptych that I did based on I saw two guys on the city bus, the 22, having this argument, and I made a painting after it, and this guy was looking at it like this, you know, sort of wrinkling up his nose at it, and my heart sunk. But then it picked back up, and I was like, you know what? I survived that. I think I can handle this. None of the paintings sold. That was the part that I had trouble with. So I got a show about a year later at the Augsburg campus. I think it was called the Krupp Gallery, Gage Gallery. I think it was the Gage Gallery. So I took all these exact same paintings. None of them were really obviously Native American artwork. And I thought, like, what did I do wrong the last time? Like, I've obviously worked very hard on these paintings. People should be buying these things, you know, like, I must have made a mistake. So I took the paintings that were $500 and I made them $5,000. And I took the paintings that were $300 and I made them $3,000, etc. And I sold like half the work in the show, and I was like, okay, I think I'm starting to see how this thing works. That's not advice to any wannabe artists, would-be artists. That's just a true story from me. And I was just like, all right, I'm gonna stay true, I'm gonna keep doing what I'm gonna do. I'm not gonna like paint what I think people want me to paint. And you know, over the last, what's it been now, like 17 years or something like that, I still run into that, you know, like, how is this Native artwork? Or, you know, like, I stopped submitting to art fairs because, you know, like the Santa Fe Indian Market, because they're like, I don't see it, you know, and that's cool, you know, that just shows me that, you know, like, if you're a plumber, don't apply for a job as an electrician. So that's kind of been my experience as an Indigenous artist. I feel like it's been great, you know, because there are people now that they want to commission me to do a piece, and it's because they want, you know, that, and not, you know, what they could probably get from anybody else. So it's been, you know, it's been hard work, and there's been some real eye rollers, but you know, I feel like it's been a good path. And as far as my role in the Indigenous community goes, I think I started out pretty selfish, you know, like I just wanted to paint like, and just freak people out or something. But I think it's you know, it's created a space, you know, where I can appeal to folks that might not really know how to talk to, you know, an artist, because like young folks really like my work. You know, like when I'm in high school or something, to do like if I'm teaching a drawing workshop or something like that, I show young folks this work and they really dig it. You know what I mean? I think it's the people who are like in the, you know, the more traditional kind of old school frame of mind for paintings that sort of look at my work and they're like, I don't really know how to place it. But I feel like moving forward, you know, like I think a lot of the next generation is going to benefit from it. Guess we'll see. Or it's really going to mess them up. I don't know. You know, what do you think, Mary? Yeah, that's probably a good place to stop. But that's been my experience. Zamara.
Oh wait, and I'll just comment. I think it does benefit. You know, I feel like I'm part of that younger generation that got to see your stuff. And back when I first started doing artwork, there wasn't a lot of local representation for surreal artists. And surrealism is what I'm really into as well as an artist. And I had a show at UWS where I got to, I think I met you there, I'm not sure, but I was first introduced to Jonathan's artwork through that exhibit because it was combining like young artists. I was in high school, and professional artists who were Indigenous, and yeah, I fell in love with Jonathan's stuff because it was just like this artist is doing stuff that I'm really into, you know. He's doing surrealism, and it was just something different, you know. So I would say it works just as from the standpoint that I'm an example of the young people influenced by it. So
I would agree with you too. Yeah. So a lot of what you said in terms of like conflicted, and I'm not going to say it again, but I just feel like it's interesting how Indigenous artists or artists of color, you know, we get that extra label. Like the only people who get to be called artists are white scream artists or Western Europeans. They get to be called artists, and the rest of us have to fit into these categories based on what our ethnic and racial identity is in this country. So on the one hand, I'm conflicted about that, because it would be nice if you're an artist, I'm an artist. We paint, we create based on what's inside of us. On the other hand, I think it's a great honor to be considered an Indigenous artist. And I also want to make sure that when I talk to people and they ask me about my artwork, because I've had conversations with people about, you know, what's real Indigenous art and what's not, is that I am a woman who was born in the 20th century. It's now the 21st century, but I'm very much grounded in my experience as a woman born and raised in what is now called the United States, taught by Western style education, playing the game, you know, of academic life. And so that's very much part of who I am. I've been created by my society. On the other hand, what's inside of me and that core of my being that speaks to that indigeneity is that thought of homeland, and that there is home, and that connection, and wanting to talk about that and to tell those stories. So that is very powerful for me, and I wouldn't want to deviate from that. And actually, just being Guatemalan American here, it just being considered, let's see, how am I going to talk about this? This is also conflicted in terms of being labeled Indigenous or having to check the American Indian or Native American box on so many forms. How to label oneself, right? To honor where I've come from, but not I'm a person of indigenous heritage from Guatemala, but I'm on somebody else's homeland, and I need to make sure that I honor that and that I speak to that and I'm responsible with that. So for me, just going into indigenous art, it was getting hooked up with some artists, an artist collective in Minneapolis called Electric Machete Studios, and they are a group of artists whose homelands are in Latin America, but also very much connected to that ancestral sense of being first peoples here in North and South America. And so showing with them and being in that group has really, I guess, defined where my art is at this point. And I'm happy for that, because then I get to show in places where I really care, you know, that the communities see that. And to me, that's really, really important, that there's representation and that we talk about resistance. And so anyway, so that's the indigenous part of my identity, being born and raised here in what is now the United States. But on the flip side of that, then, I'm going to go into this too, is in Guatemala, calling myself indigenous is also very tricky. It is a form of resistance on my part. Because like I said before, I would be considered and live the life of a white woman in my dad's home country. And partially because my mother is German and Norwegian, and when I was born and I started growing up, my grandmother was so excited that I was light-skinned and tall, because that means that they finally made it in terms of de-indigenizing. About 100 years ago, somebody in the family decided that they were no longer going to speak their language, and they weren't going to follow the traditions, and they weren't going to dress in that way. And so for me to talk about being indigenous in Guatemala is an absolute no-no. This is something that I'm constantly fighting with my relatives about. There's a lot of racism there, as there is here. And race down there means something completely different than it does up here. Simply by not speaking your languages and forgetting your traditions and moving into the middle classes, whether you're biologically indigenous or not, makes you Latino, which is mestizo, métis, mixed blood, and therefore you take the role of the colonizer in oppressing your relatives. So, and then just being an artist in Guatemala. You know, this is, at this point, I would love to show my art in Guatemala someday. I don't know if that will ever happen, just because of the danger that that might present, but I would really like to be able to have those conversations, these conversations down there. And so I really appreciate this, just the ability to have intercultural conversations around what it means to be indigenous, up here with